Auswirkungen auf die humanitäre Situation. Die Menschen haben kein Obdach, keine Nahrung, keine Medizin, keine sanitären Einrichtungen, um gar nicht erst von den täglichen Auswirkungen dieses Konfliktes zu sprechen. Opfer, die hier jeden Tag diesem Konflikt anheimfallen. Und ich glaube, dass das eben weitreichende Auswirkungen hat für die Menschen in Gaza, und wir sollten diese Situation nicht noch weiter verschlimmern. Haben Sie denn einen Plan für weitere palästinensische Flüchtlinge? Nein, den haben wir nicht. Wir arbeiten eben hier nicht mit diesen Annahmen, was passieren könnte. Wir möchten nur, dass alle Beteiligten die Komplexität und die Risiken verstehen, die damit einhergehen würden. Und wir wollen ganz klar sagen, dass es natürlich Konsequenzen gäbe, sollte eine solche Vertreibung stattfinden. Und wir sollten sie vermeiden. Es ist nicht unser Ziel, dort einen sicheren Bereich oder Einrichtungen zur Verfügung zu stellen. Aber sollte das natürlich passieren, dann würden wir das mit den humanitären Maßnahmen für die Zivilbevölkerung unterstützen. Sollte das passieren, aber das soll eben keine Ermutigung sein oder andeuten, dass wir dies akzeptieren würden. Was wären die Konsequenzen? Sie haben ja gesagt, es gäbe Konsequenzen, sollte das passieren. Nun, es wäre eine Bedrohung für unsere nationale Sicherheit und bedeutet auch für Israel Sicherheitsrisiken, unterschiedliche Operationen, die Israel, was die Besatzung angeht, durchführen muss. Es wird mehr Aufstände in der Region, mehr Unruhe in der Region nach sich ziehen. Nun, es gibt ja Berichte, dass an der Grenze Mauern errichtet werden, Einrichtungen errichtet werden, sollte eben eine Flüchtlingswelle kommen. Was sagen Sie dazu? Nun, das ist ja nur hypothetisch, denn wir haben die Grenzanlagen immer instand gehalten. Es gibt hunderte von Lastwagen.
The roads networks there, usual maintenance to our border fortifications. So I think it is a jumping to conclusion of what those activities constitute.
Prince Faisal, we were just talking in the previous panel about the security of both Israelis and Arabs, normalizing of relations. On October the 6th, you were probably closer than ever to normalization. Where are you now?
I mean, now the priority must be ending the current humanitarian catastrophe that is happening in Gaza. So where we are now is we're focused on a ceasefire, we're focused on an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and we are focused on humanitarian access for the people of Gaza. I mean, it is absolutely unacceptable that we have not yet been able to resolve the simple issue of access for humanitarian goods into Gaza. We are now down again to 100 trucks or less a day, when the need is well over 500, actually 800 trucks a day. So we are very much focused on that. But I will say, we are firmly convinced that the only pathway towards security and stability for everyone in the region, including Israel, is through a Palestinian state. And that, once we have an end to the fighting in Gaza, will continue to be our focus.
And that is tied to normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
I mean, even before October 7th, the issue of Palestinian statehood was intimately tied to how we would move forward. So it's certainly the case, it was the case before October 7th, and it remains the case now. How do we ensure that there is a secure pathway towards Palestinian statehood? The Palestinian state exists on the ground now. We just have to finalize what that means.
And what are you saying to the Israelis on this?
Well, we are not saying, we still don't have relations with Israelis, so we're not talking to them directly. But
via the Americans.
We've made clear to the Americans and others that, from our perspective, the first priority needs to be addressing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We need to find a way to end the fighting in Gaza. We need to find a way to ensure access to humanitarian goods to the people of Gaza. And once that's done, we're open to all discussions in the same context that we were before October 7th. And as I said, a key element and a key priority of that has and continues to be the issue of Palestinian statehood.
Are your people ready for normalization?
I mean, Saudi Arabia has adopted normalization as a policy since not 2002 when we put forward the Arab Peace Initiative, actually since 1982 when we put forward the Fez Initiative. So the issue of normalization isn't the challenge. The challenge is what is needed to be done, and part of that again is this issue of Palestinian statehood. And it's to me bewildering that this is such a complicated issue for some, because in the end it is first of all the right thing to do. The Palestinians obviously have the right to self-determination, but it is also the pragmatic, correct thing to do for regional security and stability.
Foreign Minister, there's been a lot of talk at this conference around concerns about the United States stepping back and Europe needing to step up. In terms of this conflict, we spoke in the last session about what Europe needed to do, but in your view, what does Europe now need to do?
Certainly to be more involved in the region. And we are proactive. We have been traveling and meeting both of you and all the Arab countries since the beginning, and we didn't wait for October the 7th. I mean, I was one to advocate for putting the Middle East in the agenda before the 7th of October, and as we have the presidency of the Council of the European Union, I have to say that before the 7th of October, I was advocating for having the Middle East situation of one of our top priority. And of course, it's even worse now. And I was in New York with both of you. We were happy to host the Peace Day initiative. It was supposed to be hosted by in Brussels by us on November, and then the 7th of October happened. It means that we were conscious of the danger, the escalation in the region. And so for me and for the European Union, and I know for the HRVP, we have to be proactive. We have proposed a comprehensive plan right now in discussion with the Arab countries, and of course we have a strong will to resolve this problem. I mean, we have inherited this war, this situation, but we have to think of our legacy right now. And I think that there is a momentum now in this tragedy, in this dramatic situation that we are witnessing. We have to to see that there is a momentum to resolve deeply the problem. We have to address the root of the problem's roots, I mean, and to avoid that we will only be witnessing only more extremism everywhere. Even in Brussels, in Paris, in Munich, we see more anti-Semitism, we see more racism, extremism are rising and rising. So we have to avoid that, we have to resolve this problem. So we need actions now, we have a strong political will to be involved in any kind of initiative, and hopefully we will be able to host a conference in the near future. So we are waiting for
But do you feel part of the problem is that Europeans are not speaking with the one voice and they need to ratchet up pressure?
Since day one, Belgium was commended for a very balanced approach, because we've condemned the 7th October attack. We have recognized the right of self-defense to Israel, but we've recognized as well the legitimate right to self-determination for Palestinian people. This is very important to give a future to these people and to address the roots of the problem. Otherwise, it can be a military answer. Only a military action cannot be able to resolve. This is for sure the problem. And of course, we are not talking with one voice. This is one of the problems. But more and more, we see more countries within the European Union who are sharing the same point of view, because now we have a death toll which is just horrifying. And we know we have 28,000 deaths, and essentially women and children. So we have to find a solution. There is an emergency, I mean.
Prince Faisal, I'm just going to pick up on what the foreign minister said about concerns around radicalization. A decade ago, the topic here was terrorism, the fight against Al-Qaeda, ISIS. Are you concerned about populations becoming radicalized as a result of what we're seeing?
Yes, of course we are, and it's something that we pointed out from the beginning in the aftermath of October 7th, that an unrestrained reaction by Israel would inevitably inflame emotions. And what we've seen now, as the minister pointed out, we're approaching the number 30,000 civilian deaths, 17,000 orphans, and the images that are coming out of Gaza and the tremendous human suffering that we are seeing, including as a result, again, I come back to the issue of humanitarian access, of a lack of food, a lack of water, a lack of medicine. This is incredibly galvanizing and certainly carries the risk of reinvigorating the message of those in the Arab and Muslim worlds that want to say that no, coexistence is not possible, no, that the message of a future that is based on prosperity, based on development, is not reasonable, that will try to recruit young people into extremist ideologies and into acts of terror. They will be energized by these images, and they will use them, especially with the prevalence of social media these days and their capacity to use that social media. So, whether it's Snapchat, TikTok, etc., and all of, the dissemination of these terrible images is a huge amount of oxygen to these extremists in a time when we had been making tremendous progress in the Arab world and beyond, in moving in a completely different direction. And of course, that risk isn't just in our countries, it's in the immediate neighborhood to in the Middle East. It goes to all Muslim countries, but even, as Minister Habib mentioned, to Europe, to the capitals of Europe. And it's incredibly dangerous. So we need to understand that this is it's not just a moral issue, the fact that the brunt of the current conflict is now being carried by innocent civilians. It is also a national security issue, us in the region and beyond. And again, also for Israel. This path is not increasing Israel's security, it is increasing the risks to that security.
Foreign Minister Shoukry, from Israel's perspective, they feel this was an attack launched on them, which led to the death of 1,200 men, women, children, and they needed to respond. How do you square that with questions around proportionality?
I think it's very clear that the Arabs, we condemned the perpetration of attacks on civilians, as we do for any civilians. But the conflict did not begin on October the 7th, and though we feel for the suffering and the pain of both Israelis and Palestinians, we have to take into account that this can't be a matter of evaluation and counting, because if we count the numbers of those innocent lives that have been affected by this conflict since 48 and before, then we get into a cycle of innuendos and lack of ability to move towards a vision of a better future. But the implications related to whether there was an imminent threat after October the 7th to Israeli security, and whether that security could have been managed in another way that does not inflict on 28, almost 30,000 innocent Palestinians that were in no way implicated in what happened on the 7th of October, and the issue of UNICEF, the 17,000 orphans that have been created, and this dimension of human suffering and destruction of 70% of all dwellings in Gaza, it does not conform to any sense of security or a vision for a better future. Again, there are issues related to self-defense, but there's also a counter as relates self-determination. The Charter of the United Nations is clear on both the principles of self-defense and the principle of a right to resist occupation. So we have a fundamental issue here, which is legitimate Palestinian rights, Israeli rights, which we recognize, right of both to live in peace, security, two states, national identities. And this has been a prolonged process, 30 years, where the international community has been paying lip service to this principle, has not taken any effective measures to implement it. And this can't continue. We can't continue in this cycle. This is not the first conflict in Gaza. This is the fifth conflict. And the ensuing devastation effects on civilians, both Israelis and Palestinians, should not be further tolerated, nor should there be justifications for this scale of destruction and impact on innocent civilians, women and children. And we have to look to a more brighter future where there is coexistence, where there's normalization, where there's cooperation, where there's integration, and not become entrapped within a cycle of violence and revenge. I don't think that the current dimensions, which seem to indicate more a desire for revenge, is going to be helpful. It's going to motivate terrorist organizations, recruitment, and animosity.
I'm going to open up the floor to the audience now for some questions. I believe there are some microphones going around as well. Yes.
There is a 58 member state of the organization Islamic Conference. Do you think this member state really got enough work? We have seen last couple of months just more books than work, and institution not slow. And another my question is, there is a 58 member state of the Islamic Conference, but none of them brought this case to the ICJ. Only South Africa, this is not Muslim country. Why Saudi Arabia or Egypt, some other Muslim country, can dare to bring this case to the ICJ? What's the problem?
Okay, I'm just take a question there and then back there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Prince Faisal, good evening. Actually, the Arab Peace Initiative that Saudi Arabia has sponsored very strongly has been announced in Beirut more than almost 20 years ago. But since then, the impediments to any solution, and mainly a Palestinian state or statehood, has been piling up, and mainly the colonization, the settlements, etc., etc. So besides stopping the bloodshed today in Gaza, which is an absolute priority, you're right, what are the prospects of dismantling all these impediments and getting back to the physical infrastructure of a minimal Palestinian statehood in your mind?
Thank you. Mina, I'll go to you.
Thank you very much, Mina Al-Arabi, The National. I want to ask how we can stop the war, because everyone said, to the exception of the United States, perhaps, that we need immediate ceasefire, and Germany, our current host country. So what do we need to actually stop the war? And my second question is more the regional, wider dynamics. The beginning of this session was entitled Iran's proxies. So I just want to bring in the issue of Iran and how we can see a reduction of these non-state actors and proxies, be it in Iraq, be it in Yemen and Lebanon, and limit their capabilities.
I'll actually, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that I should state the obvious. Hamas does not represent any legitimate aspiration of the Palestinian for a state. He rejected all the initiatives since 2006 when he was elected, and unfortunately he participated in elections. he was not willing to accept the requirements of the quartet to renounce violent terrorism. It was just after Israel withdrew from Gaza, and in October 6th, there was no one settler, one Israeli soldier in Gaza, and Gaza could have been completely free, just if Hamas would have renounced violence and terrorism. I was the chief negotiator for peace with the legitimate Palestinian Authority in the last 2 rounds of negotiations. Unfortunately, Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, didn't give an answer to the more than 2 offers that were on the table. I do hope that from this disastrous situation, hope will emerge, and the role of the Saudis and Egypt is very important. But Hamas is really part of the problem, and just stopping the war now without real change, if this will be just another round, then there is no hope for the entire region. And I do believe that there is hope for a change now. I know that the United States is working with regional partners, and just was important for me to state the obvious. Hamas is the problem, is not part of the solution.
I just want to bring it back to the panel. Prince Faisal, if you want to address some of those questions. Just a lot of questions are there about the future of two-state solution and I guess the revitalization of Palestinian Authority.
I'll try and answer a few of them collectively. And I'll pick up on the last question. Hope. Hope is the key. We need hope in our region. We need hope for the Palestinians. And I will say we need hope for the Israelis, but that is all tied into leaving exactly, that was just said, this cycle of violence, this repetitive cycle that we have entered into. You know, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Sameh just mentioned, you know, this is the 5th war in Gaza. Conflict, kinetic action on its own is not going to give security to anyone. The only pathway to sustainable security for all of us in the region is through Palestinian self-determination. The Arab states are fully committed to delivering that, but they are also committed through that to delivering a true partnership with Israel and integration into the region and security for all. But that will need hard decisions as well in Israel to decide that a two-state solution is the right approach. And there are the majority of Palestinians who are committed to a two-state solution that accepts Israel's right to exist. And using a minority of Palestinians as a reason not to move forward on that is going to keep us exactly in this cycle of violence, and it will cause us to return to where we are. And what I fear is the next explosion will be worse, not the same as October 7th. So we must focus on exactly that word, hope. We must deliver hope for our region, and that is what we are committed to. That is what the kingdom is committed to, but that is what the Arabs that we have engaged, all of our Arab colleagues are committed to. And it is, by the way, something that all of the Muslim world supports. And, because there was a question about the OIC, and I understand the criticism that the OIC could do more, and certainly we will try to do everything we can to stop the conflict. But I will say that the engagement of these 58 states across their various partnerships has resulted in movement, has resulted in a hardening of the consensus that the two-state solution is a necessary outcome of this crisis. It has resulted in countries that were not willing to talk about recognition of Palestine before, that have now started to talk about recognition of Palestine, even independent of a resolution of a bilateral negotiation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And this is all important because the more we build momentum towards hope, towards the consensus of a two-state solution, the more it becomes difficult for spoilers on all sides, including in the Israeli political spectrum, who actively obstruct every attempt to reach a resolution, the more that consensus in the global community of nations builds, the more those spoilers are isolated, and we need to isolate those spoilers.
And just to pick up on what Tzipi Livni said there about Hamas.
Well, certainly, I think it is absolutely correct that Hamas was outside of the accepted majority of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Authority, the recognition of Israel, the recognition of negotiated settlement, their refusal to advocate for violence. But there has to be also accountability in why Hamas was empowered in Gaza and why was it being financed in Gaza to perpetuate the division between Hamas and the rest of the mainstream Palestinian peacemaking entities that existed, whether it was the authority or the PLO or the general public. So here again, I think this is an issue that has been neglected and that should be addressed as well. But I think the current circumstances and the objectives, and there was a mention of the lack of consistency. This is unprecedented. This is the first conflict where there has been a reluctance to call for a cessation of hostilities. In every other conflict, the immediate task has been for a cessation of hostilities and then the resolution of whatever dimensions of a problem through the negotiations. And it's surprising that, well, if there is a reluctance to ending the military engagement, then what is the objective? Is there an achievable objective? And I think the conventional wisdom that there is not. There is not an achievable objective to be had in eliminating fully the ideology behind Hamas. And to only do that is to provide an alternative that can raise hope, that can break the cycle of violence, and that can respond to the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, as we have all recognized the legitimate aspirations of the Israeli people and their right to live in peace and security. But that right has to encompass all of the states of the region, including the Palestinians.
You've asked me the question of the division within the EU. When it comes to the two-state solution, I have to say that we are all on the same page. We know that this is the only solution to resolve the problem in the Middle East, to have two states living peacefully between, close to each other. And we have to give a future a future perspective to the Palestinian people and to give security to the Israeli as well. So we are working on this direction. We all agree. I know that some of us are reluctant when it comes to call for a ceasefire, but we are all on the same line. The end of the solution, the end of the comprehensive plan that we are working on is two-state solutions. And I have to say, to answer to your question, that for sure Hamas is a terrorist entity for us. So we don't deal with them and we don't recognize them. It's not a government. But I'm afraid and worried when I hear Netanyahu saying that he is against a two-state solution openly. So what is the solution then? That's the problem also as well, that we have to tackle all together. If the Israelis don't want a two-state solution, then what is the solution? We want to have an alternative, but we don't hear another alternative. And that's the problem also.
Kwasi. I would just wait for the microphone.
I visited the region a number of times and seen both of you gentlemen as a minister and as a parliamentarian. The other thing I want to just very broadly ask, we've been talking about the two-state solution for about 25 years. And surely, as Western politicians, we've got to ask ourselves, and I'd love to hear from the Egyptian Foreign Minister and His Royal Highness, why have we made no progress on this for 25 years?
Well, for the best of our efforts, I think there's a lack of political will on the part of the international community and on the part of those who have negotiated. I believe that the Palestinian Authority has indicated on all phases that it is receptive, it is hopeful. It has the best and most to achieve from a two-state solution, but there has been a lack of progress in those negotiations. Whether that is intentional or not, I don't want to make any evaluations, but there is a lack of achievement, and we all bear that responsibility. I think we are totally committed and convinced that this is the only solution, viable solution, that can bring the region out of this cycle of violence and create normal conditions for everyone to prosper and to live in peace. But we have for 30 years been paying lip service. There hasn't been sufficient commitment by those who have the influence and can be instrumental in moving this forward. There has been always a deflection. There either isn't a partner on the side of the Palestinians, or the division that was created to a degree, as I mentioned, maybe prematurely, between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. There's always been an excuse why we should not proceed, the security conditions, the environment of the region, and these, I think, are just a demonstration of a lack of a political will on the part of those responsible, and at the same time on the side of many in the international community who have refrained from making the right decisions and taking the right steps to move the process forward, recognizing that both sides have to make concessions, but they will only do so if they deem it in their best interest.
I have 1 minute left, so if anyone has any final thoughts, because I can't ask any more questions from the audience. But Prince Faisal, if you wanted to address the question that, we've been at this for decades, and
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pointless trying to lay blame. I think there's enough blame to go around for everyone. The point is, we agree that the two-state solution is the right solution, and it's now time to put all of our efforts into making that happen, including holding those that become obstacles to that two-state solution accountable, whether it is someone like Hamas, if it's someone like the Palestinian Authority, but if it is Israel, then whoever is the obstacle must be held accountable. We cannot hold the future of our region, the future of our generations hostage to politics or ideology, and we must push to move forward.
Accountable and consequences.
Well, exact, of course.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panelists. Thank you so much.